Because I've set the world distance record for paragliding twice. And what that means is basically just flying really long distances on a paraglider, really far, like over 400K. I was in the air over 10 hours.
You climbed Niagara Falls, right, when it was frozen?
Yeah, that was a good one.
How big is it?
It's a couple 100 feet high.
I didn't even know that it froze.
Yeah, it doesn't freeze enough to climb every year, maybe every 10 years or so. It really.
So it was a really small opportunity. You actually had to climb it.
Yeah, it was very small. It's a really big logistical challenge to make all that happen. But that's what makes it interesting. Like if this were easy, then what would be the point, right? It's because it's difficult that it's interesting. The world is as it is, and I have to adapt to it, not the other way around.
And we're rolling. So big thank you to you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ray. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you were just saying in the background, that little dot over there, that's you, right?
Yeah, that's me right there. That was our trip to Greenland, where we were mainly climbing in glaciers underneath the Greenland ice sheet, but did some iceberg climbing as well.
Amazing. How long have you been climbing for?
Well, my mom only stopped climbing when she was pregnant with me, when she could no longer see her feet. So I guess most of my life is the answer on that one.
Yeah, I saw in your TED talk, you were like climbing when you were like 5 years old or something.
Yeah, I started young, and took a break in high school basically to pursue girls and BMX bikes and things. But I always got back to it.
That's amazing. So you have a couple of really impressive world records to your name, and I've been watching your videos. I know you do work with Red Bull, and you've traveled all around the world climbing different places. So what's been, I guess we'll start with your world records, I guess, and tell me about those.
Well, I'm not sure how many of them are current, how many of them aren't. I've set a few over the past 25 years of doing different sports. So
Wow.
I'm honestly not sure what's still current, what's not.
Okay.
I'm always looking forward. I tend to go forward, but
Uh,
I think probably some of the things I've set the world distance record for paragliding twice.
wow.
So I've done that. I'm pretty sure people have flown further than me, but I may go chase that one again. I'm getting my psych on for paragliding, and what that means is basically just flying really long distances on a paraglider, really far, like over 400K.
Over 400 kilometers on a paraglider.
Yeah, it's not it's not your usual thing to do on a Sunday, really. But I got really interested in this, and in paragliding, what you try to do is fly as far as you can. Often that's always the goal. Every time a bunch of people are on a hill, there's always a sort of informal competition to see who could fly further or stay up in the air longest, things like that. It's a lot of informal competition, and there's also formal competition, and then kind of the big record that people strive to go after in that sport is long distance flying. And that means like there's no motor or anything. You just launch off a mountain or get towed up 1,000 feet in the air and then start thermaling. So just like a hawk, thermals, you see birds circling over the highways. I'm doing the same thing, except I'm on a really big paraglider, and then you glide along, you get a bunch of altitude in the thermal, you glide along, and that's where the skill part comes in, and finding the next thermal. And if you find the next thermal, you stay in the air, and if you don't, you land on the ground and try to figure out why you sucked and how to do better next time. So
Amazing.
yeah.
So the time you broke the world record, what altitude did you start at, and where was that?
That was in one was in Texas and one was in New Mexico, so kind of southwestern United States. And I started, I don't know what the altitude is there, not very high, 300 meters, 1,000 feet. And then the legal limit there is 18,000 feet and 5,000 meters, give or take. So on both those flights, I ended up pretty close to that limit. So pretty high, and it's cold. You've got to manage yourself quite carefully, and it's kind of crazy because you're standing there and this very, very hot place, but you're dressed like an astronaut with all this clothing because you're going to a place that's probably going to be pretty close to freezing. And yeah, it's tough, but it was I think the reason I was able to break those records was not so much that I'm a good paraglider pilot, but I was able to figure out a place to go that was different, that people hadn't thought of. And I was looking at the guys who fly sailplanes. These are the really big, high aspect ratio planes that people fly, just no motor, but they glide at amazing glide ratios, and they've been setting records there for a while. And I showed up and they're like, you're an idiot. you're gonna get killed in a week because it's very strong air. But yeah, eventually I got along really well with them and set some records. So it was neat.
That's amazing. So 400 kilometers. How long does it take to paraglide 400 kilometers?
Well, that's the thing. A long time.
Yeah.
I was in the air over 10 hours.
Oh my
So
gosh. 10
yeah, it's like
hours
a
in there. Nuts.
yeah. Yeah, it was a long time. And it's not like they bring you your drink and your piece of chicken after like 4 hours, it's
Yeah, sure. No
you're
bathroom
up there.
breaks.
You just gotta, you do a little irrigation up there, and it's actually a divisive subject among paraglider pilots is whether you could pee or whether you've got to use a condom catheter because you're up there so long you have to do it. So it's
Yeah.
like some people could flip forward, but other people get stage fright. You're sort of hanging there, imagine trying to take a leak while you're hanging there, 6 or 7,000 feet above the ground. Your glider's doing different, gliders bouncing around. You're trying, it gets complicated. So
Yeah.
different systems for different people. I'm lucky that I don't get stage fright. I can get it done, but it's a subject out there for sure.
Okay, sure. So I'm just thinking 400 kilometers. So I'm in Glasgow in Scotland, and 400 kilometers, I think that would be like to Manchester or Birmingham, maybe. So to think of doing that airbound on a paraglider is just crazy. But
Yeah, I was pretty surprised too. I worked really hard at that for a bunch of years and figuring out how to fly long distances and how to work the weather. And it's pretty special there. Like if you are you a fan of thunderstorms? Do you like thunderstorms?
yeah, I guess as much as one can be a fan of thunderstorms, I like them.
Well, Texas is that's where I was flying for that record was in Texas, and that's world famous. I would land every evening somewhere if it were a flyable day, and there'd always be the storm chasers, these guys in these big trucks going around. They'd be like, "Do you see any thunderstorms?" And and the reason for that is that there's so much lift and such good thermals there, and you fly along, and there's thunderstorms to your right, just giant thunderstorm after giant thunderstorm, and you're trying to stay in the clean air, generally to the left or west of them, and it's called the dry line, and it's Tornado Alley, and so you're flying the world's
Wow.
worst aircraft in Tornado Alley, and yeah, it was a neat experience for sure.
Yeah, it must be really dangerous.
Yeah, paragliding has got really high consequences, and that's kind of how I define danger in sports is the consequence level, and yeah, it's really high. So you have to be humble and be willing to leave and to not fly on stupid days and not let the big goal in all these sports is to go home, right? That's what we want
Sure.
to do. It's like, and if you forget that and you're like pushing and it's not working out, then yeah, it can really not work out. So high hazard sports, high consequence, and demand a lot of mental attention and focus.
Sure. So see when you broke that world record for the 400 kilometers, were you planning on going as far as that day when you took off? Were you planning on going as far as that, or did you just get caught in the wind and ended up much
Well,
further?
it's no, it's you definitely want to go as far as you can. It's really easy to fall out of the sky in a paraglider. Like if you don't find the next thermal, you're on the ground. And the ground in Texas, it's like 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't even know what that is because it never gets that warm in Canada where I live. So I don't know what that is in Celsius, but really hot. And if you land, it just sucks. You often have to walk out in this crazy heat, and you've got a paraglider on your back, and you really, really don't want to land. But it's hard to stay in the air. You've got to really understand how the sky works and be very precise about it all, or you land, and then you've got to hike out, and you have time to reflect on your poor decision making. Yeah, and maybe that was the world record day. Maybe that was, every summer there you probably get 2 or 3 days that are world record days. Like you've got a chance to set a world record, and maybe you just blew it. And I've had those days where I knew it was the best day of the summer, and I'm standing on the ground hating it. I didn't make the right decisions, and teaches you some humility pretty fast.
Yeah, it must do. So I'm just, I've never been to Texas, so I'm just kind of thinking about what I know, and like here in the UK and Scotland, I'm just like imagining the layout if I were to try this, and it's all just like highways and roads and cities.
Yeah.
Like for here, it would be impossible to do something like that. So see, when you were doing that distance, did you need to map out the journey to make sure you weren't going to fly over any like highways, or there's are there areas where you're just not supposed to paraglide over? Because I know with like drone, the drone cameras, I know there's some areas you can't take them. Is there certain limitations that you have to consider like that with paragliding?
Yeah, there's airspace issues. So places that are military airspace in Texas, a lot of military stuff going on in Texas. So you've got to, if you fly into these zones, you could theoretically get shot down. I don't
Wow.
think they would do that. You're not very threatening on a paraglider. They'd be like, "What's the idiot doing here?" You get arrest you later. It's not like you're not up there with like they're really not going to probably that'd be a worst case thing. But yeah, you've got to avoid the airspace, and you can't think about where the roads go because you have to think about where the thermals are. So
Mhm.
there's roads on the ground, and then there's you could think of them as roads in the sky that are marked by cumulus clouds. Cumulus clouds are the tops of thermals. And if
Mhm.
you're trying to fly the road so you can get an easy retrieve if you land, then you're not going to be in the right place in the sky. So quite consciously, I totally ignore the ground. And I've had some very long walks as a result. But I also think that's one reason I've been successful at long distance paragliding is I am willing to walk.
Mhm.
We've done some other big trips flying across big portions of North America on paragliders or paramotors or whatever, and I'm willing to walk if it goes sideways. I fly in very remote areas. But I mean, people do fly far in Scotland too. Eh? Like it's not people do fly. I think the record in Scotland's got to be at least a couple hundred K now, even
Oh,
though the
really?
airspace. Yeah, it's really impressive to me. I mean, if you could, I've only flown a little bit in Scotland, but it's a hard place to fly. Like the Scotland, England. I flew into Ireland last 2 years ago, I guess, and it's you've got so many airspace issues and so many people in such a relatively small area.
Exactly. Yeah.
You could probably fit. Probably gonna get you're probably gonna get hammered in the comments, but I'm pretty sure you could fit Scotland inside Texas. It's
Oh,
such a
you
huge thing.
easily, probably, yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's so you got it's just it's you're very alone out there. You're up in the sky and flying over areas that have no people in them for a long way, and it's actually oddly peaceful most of the time, except when it's terrifying. So it's neat.
That's awesome, man. Speaking of the UK, I saw you were in, I don't know if it was on your YouTube channel or one of them. You were in Ireland recently to do some climbing. So obviously you hold records in paragliding, but I think climbing's your main sport.
Well, they're both. I've gone back and forth.
Okay.
Like I'm probably best known as an ice climber. Hence the backdrop here. But
Mm.
I do both. Like obviously, summer is a poor season for ice climbing, right? It's kind of
Hmm.
kind of doesn't work out so hot. So I do a lot of rock climbing, and then I used to do a lot of competitive rock climbing as well. So winning or competing, not always winning. Let's be
Hmm.
clear about that. I lost a lot of them, but I won a few in rock climbing and also paragliding in the summer, and do a lot of kayaking, mountain biking, pretty much anything
Amazing.
mountain. I'm in.
So what's the differences you in your preparation or in carrying out the feat if it's a because in a lot of your videos you're in like you're climbing up on ice. So what about if you're climbing on ice or on rock? What's the sort of differences you need to take into account for that?
Well, you want sort of the opposite in the two sports. You want cold conditions, obviously, for ice climbing, and so every time winter starts in Canada, it's always a shock. It's like, really, it's this again. I'm going to be out there. Where I live this morning, it's minus 15 degrees Celsius,
Wow.
and so that's pretty chilly. I don't know what that is. Is Scotland on Fahrenheit or
No, we
Celsius?
use Celsius. We use
Okay,
Celsius.
good. But do you use miles on the roads,
Yeah.
or is that just? It's very confusing to me.
We use miles and Celsius.
Yeah, like what's up with that? I want to, yeah. So anyhow, so you get the cell, yeah, minus 15 degrees, but we'll be rock climbing tomorrow. It'll be plus 12 tomorrow, so we'll be rock climbing in the sun. And I guess the preparation is for me, it's just seasonal. I do what's best at any given season. I was rock climbing a week ago and ice climbing 2 days ago, and there'll be a bit more ice climbing for sure this season, and then it'll be rock climbing and paragliding and kayaking season, and so it goes. I've been
Amazing.
doing this for a long time.
That's amazing. Okay, so tell me, like, see when I was watching the videos of you ice climbing, it looks very dangerous. It looks like there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And in your TED talk, I think you said in the 20 years that you've been doing this, you've never fallen, right?
Yeah, well, there's different forms of ice climbing, right? So I've never fallen off like pure ice climbing, so on an ice climbing waterfall, it's a
Mhm.
frozen waterfall, but I've fallen off like ice climbing like these glacier caves and stuff up the roof of that, and that's safe because oddly enough, the steeper it is, the safer it is. If you hit something with crampons, which are the spikes on your feet,
Mhm.
they look a bit like that medieval stuff you've got. I assume it's medieval, I don't know, but you've got some weaponry and a
Mhm.
helmet behind you there.
Yeah.
And my sport's got these big fangs on it,
Uh-huh.
right? That you kick into the ice, and they work great for that. But if you fall off, they catch in the ice. and it's kind of like sticking your leg in a vice and then
Your body's
throwing
just
your weight.
dropping. Yeah.
Yeah, so you tend to break a lot of things pretty quick. So I don't fall off, and then but rock climbing, you can fall off because especially if it's steep, you've got good gear and you don't tend to break yourself as much. So you have to approach ice staying very much within your limits, whereas the idea for hard rock climbing is to like push it and go as hard as you can, and the
Wow.
gear is good, so you don't generally die if you
Um,
fall off rock climbing, unless you're
no,
not using a rope, and then in which case you do.
yeah, sure. Have you ever had had injuries from ice climbing or rock climbing?
Well, you can probably just see with this cut on my nose here.
Oh
That's what
yeah.
I got. Just a little bit of a,
Oh,
a
I
little
see
bit
it.
of
I
a,
see it. Yeah.
yeah.
How did you do
So yeah.
that?
Well, I was ice climbing and I had this kind of Teletubby 3D thing on my head.
Uh-huh.
One of those 3D cameras, and
Like a
I'm
GoPro or something.
yeah, like one of those 360 GoPro things. So it has to be on
Mhm.
a stock that's like a foot off the top of my head. So I whack some ice off above me and I go to duck and the Teletubby hits the ice and then it slides down the Teletubby and
Oh
hits
my
me in the
gosh.
face. But it happens. It's just these are this does happen ice climbing. Everybody gets a cut or two on their face. You just try to avoid the really catastrophic smashes.
Wow, crazy man. I find what you do so interesting. So tell me about some of your steepest climbs, because one of them, which I thought was super, just incredible, was you climbed Niagara Falls, right, when it was frozen.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a lot of I learned a lot about American politics on that one. Yeah, getting the permits and getting everything organized took years of work. It
Oh,
was
really?
just it was a battle. It was a total battle. I called up the
Ah,
person who was responsible for the park, and I was like, parts of Niagara freeze, and I think I could climb them, and could I come and do that? And the guy was like, no, and if I see you here, I'll have you arrested.
really?
Really, really
Wow.
hard. Yeah, he meant it. Like he was not, and because they're dealing with a lot of tourists there, right? It's like it's a
Sure.
global tourist attraction, and every year somebody tries to go over in a barrel, and half of them die, and they just don't want that going on there. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it took a long time, and then finally got a great team together, and I mean that about American politics. I had to meet with like the governor of New York's office and figure out how it would work,
Really?
and yeah, it was a lot of work.
Wow.
And then after all of that, then there's actually climbing it safely, right? Like there's Niagara Falls. That thing's really there's a reason it's famous.
Yeah. How big is it?
It's a couple 100 feet high, so
Okay.
it's there's so much water going off of it. It's like when you're there, the ground. Have you been there? A lot of people have been there.
Never been there.
Oh, you should go check it out. The
I'd love
ground
to.
shakes. Yeah, well,
Really.
it's there. They're set up. Go check it out.
The
Hopefully
ground
after we
actually
get.
shakes from the waterfall.
Yeah, there's
That's
so much
insane.
force. It's like 1,000 freight trains going off the
Wow.
lip at the same time, and the water level fluctuates. It was a lot of people see what I do and they're kind of like, you're crazy. And they're right. It is kind of crazy. It's not something that you should do every day, but it took a lot of figuring out, like, for example, the water levels fluctuate. So when are they going to fluctuate? They pull power for different needs. And you've got to be thinking, okay, what's happening in New York City that they're going to need power now, and that's going to drop the water level, and then they're going to return it to Niagara
Now I
Falls.
see why there's so much planning in this.
It's epic. And
It's
finally,
probably a really small window of time that you can actually climb it for as well. And see, until I actually saw you climb Niagara Falls, I didn't even know that it froze.
it doesn't freeze enough to climb every year. Maybe every 10 years or so it
So
freezes
it
up.
was a really small opportunity. You actually had to climb it.
Yeah, it was very small. Like, but I was prepared to wait. Once I got the permitting and everything figured out, if it took 5 more years or something to do it, then I was prepared to do it. But it was a big decision. As soon as I said, "Hey, we're going for it," then you've got hundreds of people involved. You've
Hmm.
got all these. There's 4 or 5 different helicopters involved for different rescue
Wow.
agencies. Like it's dozens of safety people, and it's a really big logistical challenge to make all that happen. But that's what makes it interesting. Like if this were
Sure.
easy, then what would be the point, right? It's because it's difficult that it's interesting.
Yeah, sure. Do you have fear when you go into these expeditions, these climbs?
Yeah, I think if you're not afraid, something's probably wrong with you. I'm gonna fly my paraglider down Tornado Alley, for 10 hours. This is gonna be fine. Right? That's you really should be someone. You should have some fear, or something's probably wrong with you. And I think
Mhm.
Fear is one of my, people assume that I'm this sort of fearless person, but I'm really not. I think one of the reasons that I've had a long career, probably the main reason, is because of my fears. They've saved me over and over again,
Mhm.
and learning how to differentiate between what's a realistic fear and what's just my brain gerbling, is has been one of the greatest skills of my life, I think. And using that fear to go, why am I afraid? At Niagara Falls, if, if you're going down to the base of Niagara Falls to climb it, you ought to be afraid. It's a lethal environment. There's like a lot of ways to die really fast down there. And so you've got to figure out what they are and what the hazards are and how you're going to mitigate them and actually mitigate them, not just recognize them. I think in a lot of the risk planning I do, and I see where I've made errors, I've recognized a
Mhm.
risk and then haven't fixed it, haven't mitigated it. So
Sure.
that's what I try to do, is use my fears to recognize hazards and then mitigate them. And you know, when I'm driving in your country, for example, it's like I'm more fearful because I have bad instincts. I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. You've got these, Scottish people are going for it. What's the bridge? What's the bridge there in Edinburgh that goes? This it's just like mayhem. It's a
Yeah.
big red
Uh-huh.
bridge painted.
Uh,
There's a
I know the one you're talking about. I don't know what it's called. I'm from
anyhow.
Glasgow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, it's totally different. We're all,
Yeah.
but no, it's like you use those fears to figure out what's going on. And for me, it's like, okay, I have to reprogram my brain, for example, when I'm driving in countries where they drive on the left, to
Mm,
make sure that I'm in the center of the road and come up with a system, and then I can do it. But it's and if I make the wrong decision, I could kill me and somebody else. So
sure.
I try to use that fear as a tool to be like, all right, keep focused and maybe lower my standards. I might drive
Mm,
like a bit of an idiot here in Canada, but I'm going to settle it down when I'm in your country, because I
sure,
just
man.
don't have I don't have as much headroom to make decisions, and I don't want to do the wrong thing. So it's figuring
Yeah.
those things out. Yeah.
I think that's really good what you said about how you manage the fear and how it's necessary. And I was doing a podcast not too long ago with a doctor, and he was talking about hormones, cortisol. And in a lot of athletes, the cortisol tends to be higher because it gives them a sharper focus and it allows them to react quicker to, situations where suddenly change can happen. But then also in people that tend to be really anxious and suffer from anxiety problems, they have high cortisol, and it's not so much the hormone in of itself. It's like the management of it. It's like the fear is good. It's giving you an ability to react and think faster. However, if it's not managed correctly, in yourself, that fear can lead you to being a nervous wreck. Or if there's no fear at all, you could be slow to react, or you could become discomplacent and do something which kills you. So it's kind of necessary having that balance of fear. So see, when you go into one of these things, do you ever do like meditating, or is there anything you kind of do to, I don't know, mitigate the nerves but still have the fear there? Is that, do you have such a thing?
Yeah, I mean the cortisol thing is really interesting, and I've read a fair amount about that as well. And I'm,
Mm,
I'm sure your doctor guessed it. I'd love to talk to him or her about that and understand how it works. But I think that's a really useful skill, is to use your fear to get things done and decide maybe if they aren't worth doing as well. Running away is important too. Maybe you can't
mm,
make it safe enough that it's reasonable, and that's okay too, and time to run away. But yeah, that fear and that cortisol production, that adrenaline production is is critical to do well at this. So what I don't do is really meditate. To answer your question, I don't really meditate, but I do a lot of scenario planning, and I think of all the things that can go wrong. So I sit there on a flight to somewhere, or not while I'm driving so much, but I just figure out everything that can go wrong, that I can conceive of, and have a plan for it. So and that helps me decide whether it's a good thing to be doing or a reasonable thing to be doing. And then if something does go wrong, I've already got a plan for it. I've already thought it through. It's not like, wow, in this half second of time before that piece of ice breaks off, or that other crazy North American driver in Scotland forgets what side of the road they're on too. I've already thought, where am I going to go? It's like, oh, I'm always going to go to this side of the road, or
Mm.
Okay, in this country, the the fast lanes are in the center, so where I want to go, I've got room there and I've got room there, and if everybody locks it up in front of me, I'm thinking that way all the time. When I'm driving, to me, it's pretty high hazard, actually. It's like things go wrong, and so I want to be like, okay, I'm going to go that way in this country. My country, I go this way, but now I've thought about this, and today I'm going that way if I need to, and I know that that's the safe way versus the other way, and that's how I look at things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, maybe it's productive cortisol, maybe it isn't, I don't know, but it's helped me over and
Definitely
over
sounds
again.
productive. Yeah. Being able to identify everything that could go wrong. It's a really clever way to think at it, and obviously it's led to you being successful in what is probably considered quite a dangerous sport. Is that right? Would you consider your sports to be quite dangerous ones?
Yeah, I think if you don't think they're dangerous, it's again probably something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Like these are high hazard activities. And it varies too. I think to the outside world, everything that I do probably looks, well, not everything, but many of the things that I do look very high hazard. But there's different levels of sort of inherent hazard or consequences in different sports. For example, I'm sure you've got a couple of climbing gyms there in Glasgow, and if you
Yep.
go to one of those, the odds are excellent you'll make the pub that afternoon. There, even with no training, there's people there. It's a very controlled environment.
Sure.
There's not very many variables. Whereas if you go like, climbing this in Greenland, there's a lot of variables. And
Sure.
so for me, a lot of how I look at risk is just what are the number of variables that I can actually control, and what are the variables that I can't control. So in this picture behind me in Greenland, there's a lot of variables I can't control. That thing won't be there in anywhere from a minute to a year. It's
Mm.
going to roll over, and I can't control that. It's going to break into smaller pieces, and I can't control that. And when that happens, it'll be super violent on a lot of different levels. The mayhem of an iceberg breaking up is out of hand. So the only way I can really mitigate that is to be quick, get on and get off, and reduce my exposure time. And maybe it's not even, maybe it's a stupid thing to do. Sometimes it gets to that point. I'm like, it's just a bad idea. But the more complicated an environment gets,
Mm-hmm.
often the more hazard it has. If you're sending a person to the moon, there's a lot of variables there. It's intrinsically very high hazard and very unforgiving of error. And that's another whole component to this is if you do make a mistake, how forgiving is that environment of an error? Because I don't know about you, but every morning I wake up and by the time I go to bed, I've made at least, a good day, I make 100 errors. Yeah. Like at the start of our call, my mic's not working. I've done 100 Zoom calls this year, probably. And this morning, my mic's not working. There we go. First error of the day, although I might have made one before that. But we all do. So how robust are your systems to deal with error?
Yep.
Can you build it enough margin to deal with human error, or is it just
Mm-hmm.
this has to be perfect? And I try not to operate in those perfect environments very often because I make errors, so I don't want to be there very often.
Yeah, I love the way that you think about it. It's a really uh, responsible and like sensible way to do it. So it just see when I've watched your videos and I've seen other ice climbers do this. Like you've got the two kind of like pickaxe things. Um, I always find it like crazy that you've got this hammer thing, you dig it in, and that's actually strong enough to pull up your body weight. Because I've always thought that if you did that, like the ice would break. Like how does it? How can that hold your whole weight? Is that I don't know. Do you ever have an issue with that, or are these things absolutely solid and it's easy to get them in the wall? Or like you must need to hit it pretty hard as well for it to be in deep enough that it can support your full weight traveling up ice.
Well, I think you've just identified one of the main problems of becoming a good ice climber is
Okay.
understanding what's strong and what's not, and that takes time to
Mhm.
understand. Ice is actually incredibly strong. Yeah, stuff. It's very, very, um, very, very strong material. Like if you've got a bridge of ice this thick, maybe I don't know, like 10 inches or whatever of ice, you can drive a car on it
Oh,
on water, and they drive like semi trucks across the frozen ocean and stuff. Like it's incredibly strong stuff, but it is, as you point out, also fragile. It's crystal, and it breaks. And if you get even this much of your pick and good ice, you could hang, I'm going to guess, like a 1,000 pounds on it. It's
really?
very, very strong if the load is applied slowly, but if you swing at it, it shatters. And so learning how to get good placements without shattering the ice too much. And most ice climbers could probably give you a half an hour, I'm not going to do that, but could give you a half an hour discussion on what temperature does to ice, and what is good ice and what is bad ice, and what sun does to ice. And ice sublimates, meaning that it goes straight from a solid to a vapor. And
Hmm.
over time, that makes it weaker, and what that ice looks like versus good blue ice that's got a lot of water content and is very hard and solid, versus sun bleached ice that has a lot of, it's been turned into these big old crystals that really, it's endless. If the Inuit in northern Canada have 1,000 words for snow, we've got like at least 100 words for different forms of ice. So yeah, you've just identified that.
Well, I thought there was
There's
only one kind
differences.
of ice.
Yeah, in your drink, right?
Yeah, I thought that
Do you put
was
that in your do you put ice in your whiskey or not? That's the only real question about ice, isn't it?
it. Oh man. Well, that's interesting. So, is that something you need to take into account when you're doing one of these like expeditions? You need to think what kind of ice is here.
Yeah,
What?
what the season's climate has done to it.
Mhm.
What's happened that season, and why. And it's a lot like avalanche forecasting or something, in that you have to understand how that ice formed and what's happened to it since then, and what's it going to, sort of why it's going to be working the way it is when you climb on it. And this is another big principle across everything I do, is accepting things as they are. We all have these ideas. I'm like, it's minus 15 out. It's ice is going to be great. And then I
Mhm.
get out there, and it's been quite sunny here the last week, and the top 10 cm's is all sun baked and lousy, and it's not agreeing with my idea of the world. And I can either continue on, assuming that my assumption was right, or I can do the right thing, hopefully, and go, yeah, this is not what I thought it was going to be today. It's very different, and I'm going to adapt. And the world is as it is. I have to adapt to it, not the other way around.
Mhm.
That's a really basic concept of the surface, but it's very, very important for doing high risk things.
Yeah, of course. Uh, that's incredible, man. So, what have you got planned next? Do you have any big, uh, like obviously you spent years planning that Niagara Falls one. Do you have any such ventures in your mind that you've planned to do or you would like to do eventually?
Yeah, I'm sure, I, life's pretty good for me. It hasn't been the best year economically, but it's been we're all healthy and doing fine, and I hope everybody else is, too. Obviously, it's the time of COVID right now, and
Hmm.
tough time. So I've had a lot of things canceled this year, as I'm sure many people have, or it's very difficult to travel internationally. We've got quarantine. If we leave, we've got to be in quarantine for 2 weeks when we come home,
Sure.
which is, it basically makes international travel pretty hard. And so there's been a lot of battles with that, but and a lot of cancellations. This has been the year of like taking your calendar and just taking things off of it. But I'm hopeful that I will get to travel some in the coming months. So I've got a trip in northern Canada to do a really neat project there with a couple of scientists on some of the world's oldest rocks. So I'm excited about that.
Wow.
And then I've got another one in Antarctica in January. So I'm hopeful that we can go and do those things. But I think, right now, adventure is taking a bit of a backseat to some of the bigger things that we have going on around us.
Yeah, cool, man. Sweet. I just have a couple of wrap up questions. So, one of them is, are you a reader?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
tell me about your favorite books. What are your favorite books?
Well, anything by Cormac McCarthy. That guy's a genius. Do you ever read anything by him?
No, is that fiction, non-fiction?
It's fiction. Do you mainly read nonfiction, or?
Mainly I read non-fiction, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll have to get your recommendations at the backside of this, because I do read some nonfiction as well. But now Cormac McCarthy, he writes these sagas about, the writing in them is just great writing. So he wrote a book.
What's the sort of the stories? Is it like science fiction or is it?
No, I do read a lot of science fiction too. I'm reading the latest William Gibson science fiction book right now. It's on my phone. I was reading it last night, way too late. So, but no, Cormac, he writes these sort of historically semi-accurate books about people in really terrible situations in life, basically, or in things where they're way over their head, and they try to resolve them in some way. And it's just, his writing is so good. If you could write, 10 sentences like Cormac McCarthy in your life, it'd
Wow.
be worth it. He's a hell of a writer. So I try to, on my good days, I might have like 1/10 of that guy's talent already. But yeah, so Cormac McCarthy, William Gibson for that, anything like that. I like a lot of the sort of Malcolm Gladwell stuff as well, if you've read any of that.
No, but I've heard of that name, Malcolm Gladwell. What's he written?
He wrote a bunch of books that sort of take our common presuppositions about things and take them apart. For example, why are some athletes so much better than others? He breaks it down, and one of the big determiners is not how talented they are, but where they were born in the yearly cycle of their sport. So if you're Canada, it's
Wow.
hockey, right? So if you're born at the right time of year, you're actually 11 months bigger and older than the people you're playing against. And if you're born at the wrong time of year, you're 11 months younger. So pretty much all
Ah,
the top
okay.
hockey players in Canada come out of that 11th month. So anyhow, it's that 11-month
Wow.
slot where and you get selected for the next advanced team and the next advanced team, and this tends to go on. And it's an anomaly that it's born early in that
What's that
category.
book
So just
called? Why are some athletes better than others? That's the name of
no,
the
it's
book.
just that's just one essay. He wrote
Oh, okay.
it's blank. You just look up. He's got like 4 or 5 books like this, and they're really good books. So I like things like that challenge me a bit. And how about yourself? I'm always looking for new things to read.
Oh,
What do you?
I love nonfiction. A lot of it's philosophy and personal development.
Hmm.
Uh, an all-time favorite of mine is As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. I really like As a Man Thinketh.
You're gonna hear some cracking here as I move all the junk show on my desk out of the way. But I'm gonna write that one down there,
Yeah,
buddy.
As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. So this book was written in the 1920s. It's very, very short. Like you could read the book in maybe like 20 or 30 minutes, but it's beautifully written. It's very poetic. But he's talking about how your thoughts affect your circumstance and how it shapes your entire life. And he's comparing your mind to a garden. It's like a metaphor, but the way he just keeps going deeper into the metaphor and deeper into the metaphor and explaining different aspects and how powerful thinking is. I mean, like a lot of those books, there are psychology books and like spiritual books, and it all comes back to is like the mindset and how you approach challenge and how you think about things. But just as like a kind of really poetic summary of it, I think that book's excellent.
Right on. Well, I wrote it down. I learned something here this morning, so it's already a good day. I'm pretty fired up. Thank you for that.
Good man. Two more questions for you. One is, do you have a favorite quote?
Probably. Yeah, I've got a few of them. And one of them I like. I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but nobody ever died wishing they'd spent more days at their desk.
That's really true.
So get outside, do the things that family, friends, whatever. But it's the living is desks are important. I'm at mine right now. It looks like you probably are too.
Yeah, I
So
am too.
they're important. Yeah. It's but getting out there and doing those things that's what I like for sure.
Come on. And last one for you is favorite movie.
Favorite movie. Oh boy, I'm gonna sound like a psycho with this one, I'm sure. What is my favorite movie? Well, one that was really memorable to me was, I don't know if you remember seeing a movie called Seven. It was about a psychotic killer.
Seven, is that with Tom, not Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt
Yeah, he basically is a
and
psycho killer.
or Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was a good movie.
that's amazing that you remember that. I could never do that. That's awesome. But I mean, the thing I liked about that is that somebody had this idea and then went and executed it incredibly well. And obviously, the guy's a psychopath and not something that you want to emulate. But just that execution of a brilliant idea, I
Yeah.
thought was he that's what for me is interesting in life. Not doing that, but just the idea of figuring out something cool to do, whatever it is, and then figuring out how to make your life work to make that happen is it's pretty amazing.
Oh, totally. I love movies with good psychopaths. Like, yeah, psychopaths are such interesting characters, like in real life or in the movies, and seeing an actor do one convincingly is excellent. Another good movie is maybe you've seen American Psycho.
Yeah, American Psycho, the book too, right?
There's a book, yeah. I've not read the book, but I've seen the one with. I think there's two movies, but I'm referring to the one with Christian Bale.
Yeah, I need to watch that again. The book was that I want to say it was Bret Easton Ellis, but I don't think that's right. Was he all the might have been.
I'm not sure.
I read that. I need to read. I'll watch the movie again too. I'm always looking for a new movie. Not a lot of us are watching more movies than we used to, right? So.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to get this posted. Oh, but before we cut it off, where can people find you? What
Oh yeah,
social media are you on and stuff?
yeah. I'm not the best social media person, but Instagram is just the real Will Gadd, and somebody had Will Gadd already. There's actually I think he's Scottish. Actually, there's an accountant that owned the Will Gadd, and he's gmail.com, and I'm William Gadd at Gmail. So he forwards me these messages. I love this guy. I want to meet him one day. He'll be like, "This one's for you. I am not going to go do this." Anyhow, I'm the real Will Gadd on Instagram, and then willgadd.com. For speaking or writing, or if you have an interesting waterfall that freezes up near you, or whatever, drop
Yeah.
me a line. I'm always interested.
Cool, man. I'll put all of your links in the comment. Sorry, in the description. But thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, have a great evening over there, and keep it steady on the road.
You too, man. Thanks.